Well, let's see. We can see how my day is going to go. That thing there is called a PTO shaft. It's a little U-joint. It's supposed to be attached to a yoke back up over there. You can see part of it there in the shadows. There is a round piece that half moon shape should be completely round. So you can see where it's sheared off in the middle of the night while I was working a job. So, there's a reason why I like to sometimes take videos from unique and different locations, just for the sake of us, showing things. Other times because, well, who wants to look at me and my greasy, sometimes less than agreeable mug? Now, this is appropriate location as far as I'm concerned for my conversation on our subject topic of dwarves. Now, they are far more three-dimensional than most people play them, in my opinion. I have had a few friends over the years and gaming associates who truly understood how to roleplay these somewhat seemingly surly, intractable types. And a lot of people, on the other hand, either play them as grumpy humans or have a very narrow stereotype in mind when they think of them. Now, it's helped in the past decade or two that we've seen a number of movies come out that show a variety of dwarves and their functions both as among themselves, amongst their own society, and in the larger societies that they interact with. Just like the personalities, their cultural differences, accents, and so on and so forth. Now, Rob Gustafson's going to do a much better video than mine. I have no doubt about that, and his is going to be more detail-oriented and articulated, as is his skills. Me, this is always from the heart, from the emotion, from the spirit of my love for the hobby and the game, and I love being bombastic whenever I get an opportunity to do so. Now, it seemed to me that when a lot of my players over the years have chosen to play the dwarf character, the dwarf becomes this intractable, immovable force that not necessarily is properly attuned to what the character race is. And one of my thoughts, especially when I, in the past, have created dwarven communities or even kingdoms for my home-created campaigns, was the wider range of not just personality types, but career tracks, as an example. I think Peter Jackson in The Hobbit did a very credible job of bringing that to the front, if you were paying attention. It's very briefly mentioned. But of the 13 dwarves who accompanies Bilbo to the Lonely Mountain, amongst that group, you have some nobles and you have some true fighters, but you also have a large collection of merchants, toy makers, craftsmen, miners, you name it. The fact of the matter is that just like any functional society, the Dwarven society is going to have a larger range of personality types and quirks, as well as background experiences and skill sets. To say that most dwarves, or all dwarves, are fighters at heart, well, there's some truth to that, and I'm not going to debate that or argue that. Although I still would stand out that if you look at some of the other characters that have cropped up, as I've recently pointed out, that there are exceptions to the rule. There's always exceptions to every rule. Now, as a culturally diverse race, I don't think they get as much attention as they could. And in part because we all have this collective view of how a dwarf should be. And it's somewhat amusing that we no longer equate the dwarf of fantasy with the little people of our reality, because they're not the same thing. And they were never the same thing, which is something it took time for most of us to mature enough to understand the differences. When I was younger, I always thought, well, they were just little people. Just like somehow or another, the halfling, the hobbit, was another version of the little people. And they have a quite distinct culture of their own as well, although it parallels humanity quite a bit. The dwarves, accents-wise, a lot of times are played off as these, as Rob will probably bring up, these angry or aggressively gruff Scotsman types with the thick brogue and the quick to anger. But I also can see them as an Irish type. I could see them as, a Anglo-Saxon type. I can see them as a French type. They get some French dwarves and an American type. The list goes on and on. I can see them as a African American type, although you don't see that crop up too often. I imagine that it's plausible. Why not have cultural diversity amongst these playable, friendly races, or goodly races, as it's been so deemed? The truth, in my mind, of course, when creating a culture or a large city or citadel or what have you, was to keep in mind that there's a reason why it's a city, and amongst the city there's going to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different types of jobs and career paths and needs for the city and the culture and the community as a whole. And part of that, I think, is to keep in mind that not every dwarf is a fighter first. A lot of them are warriors second, and tradesmen or craftsmen, what have you, first, and to not shoehorn them into the standard traditional, they're either going to be engineers or mechanics in this case, or miners first, and then warriors second. And culturally speaking, I think that holds true the larger the community. The smaller the community, the more need for a cross range of skill sets and abilities. When we get into the larger human communities, what do we see? Far more specialization. We now live in a society today where most of us, the lion's share of us, are specialized to some degree. Whereas quite a few of us still have that jack of all trades ability to do a lot of different things as needed, or as our needs propel us to. But most of us went through the effort of going to college and school and education or trade school or the military to gain specific areas of expertise, making us specialists. Looking at the larger culture, I think Angel made a comment in my last video about how she would like to see a wider range of diversity showed in the individual cultures. And I'm with that. As long as it doesn't bog down the gameplay, there's no reason that the backstories can't have more depth to them if you're willing to put the time in. And one of the advantages I've always had over the years in my mind of creating my own home campaigns is that they're plug and play. What I meant by that is that when I spent a lot of time creating an elvish culture, I could just transfer it to a new game campaign. Whether or not I had a player who was an elf or not, didn't matter. I could still use a lot of this backstory that I created for other games and tie them into my current campaign for a larger worldview. That's just a thought anyway. And looking at the dwarves themselves, I'm thinking of some of the game systems that I have that show dwarves, and most of them are the same. We do see a little bit more variety when you look at Shadowrun, but for the most part, you still have the dwarves running in the either combat arena or the technical support side of things. But occasionally you can see a shaman or a wizard, and so on and so forth. Well, you don't see a whole lot of those in D&D, in part because back in the day, going back to the old school stuff, they were just starting out, and they quantified a lot of things for reasons. Even further back, when the dwarf and the elf and stuff was actually more like a class and not a playable race. And I'm sure I will get I will get some commentary to that effect. And, what the hell do I know? It's like a little cheesed or sore about it, but I know I did my math. I know that Wesley and I spent an awful lot of time rolling the law of probability with our dice, or the law of averages, as I put it. And that if you roll the dice enough times in a sequence, you're going to find that the mid-range numbers come up far more often in your rolls than in equal amounts. And no amount of people in the world is going to tell me otherwise. Yes, ideally, if you roll a 10-sided dice, each number should come up evenly, but they don't do that. There's a reason why we see far more medium range rolls in games using the same set of dice that are supposed to be equally diverse. Sorry, argue it all you want. Rob made a very eloquent case for it, and he vindicated me, although his verbiage was more maybe in tune for what I had in my head than what my verbiage is. But that's me. I'm sorry, I'm not a wordsmith to the degree that some of you guys are. And I try not to let that bother me too much, but it is what it is. That's the culture of diversity for the fat man. So, there you go. There you have it. My take on the dwarf.